welcome! I'm going to talk about some books, because I have got a lot of books, and some of them are pretty wook books. I've not planned this out, I never do, we're just going. I'm going to start with the first ever book I was given. It was given to me by my dad. It was a book of his profession at the time. Granted, it wasn't a very long time that he was doing this as far as I'm aware, but even still. This is the first book I ever wrote. It's called Miracles on Demand by Charles Tebbets. It's hypnotherapy, it's self-hypnosis. This, I read when I was very young. I wasn't able to understand it. When I read it now, I'm actually able to relate to a lot of things, and I've tried many times over the years throughout my life. It goes into a lot. Here's Charles Tebbets here. Chapter 1, first, understand human behaviour. Chapter 2, uncovering techniques related to hypnotherapy. Chapter 3, rapid change techniques of hypnotherapy. It tells you the things that you can do with those techniques and the ways to further harness. Then working through the techniques, all a hypnotherapist needs to know about psychology and more. Fingernail biting cured in one session. The programming and reprogramming of a flasher, changing sexual preference in a willing subject. Right, they're talking about a guy who wants to, do the whole trench coat thing and go out and I'm Batman, people. So that might actually be a potential dialogue use case. Yeah, it is. It's dialogue. It's them going. He's gone through this with a subject, and this is the dialogue between the two of them. And the girls enjoyed seeing you, did it? Anything else happened at the time that was interesting to you? I'm just giggling, it was hard. You were enjoying it and you knew the girls were enjoying it. I don't understand why it was hard, but so I didn't want them to see it that way. I wanted them to see it the way I usually see it. I think so, they giggled. I'm standing in the window watching some kids come home from school. Just got home and the kids next door have been putting their hands in each other's pants and I kind of want them to do that with me. So, yeah, this guy needs help. I've actually never read that much of the dialogues. I've only ever gone probably around that far in. But what I have spent more time with is this one, and this is actually the best one to start off with. This one gets way more advanced. This one is bite-sized. So if you're actually going to attempt, to go down this path, don't get this book. For a start, it'll cost you a fortune now. But maybe have a look out for this one, because this is the contents of this, but bite-sized. And as a kid, I wish that I'd have actually read this one instead of getting fixated on the nice, cool-feeling hardback book. Next, let's ground us a little bit. So I'm going to talk about these two books together. I want to clarify quickly, by the way, I'm not necessarily the most well-read person, people who are book people. My girlfriend's a book person. There's just so much I don't know. I grew up with video games, books were around, but I didn't take to reading until later in life, I'm 33. Despite the fact I've got all these, I've been collecting more than I've been actually setting aside time to, read them. But these two are kind of at the start of a new reading journey that I consider myself on. These are two books in which I read one after the other that I feel are paramount. That's Fahrenheit 451 and, of course, 1984. You often hear these two books spoken in the same breath, but maybe not in the way that I'm going to, maybe not in the way that I see them. I consider this book to contextualise reading books, to contextualise media, and sort of the narratives and the thoughts that can come from it. This is a world of a person who doesn't read yet, doesn't read and is about to find meaning in the things that exist. This one is about being in a world where you don't trust the information and you're trying to get a grip on your mind to write something down. Reading books, writing books. Read one after the other with that in mind. Maybe it could be interesting. My mind just sort of put that together for itself. It happened that, just worked with my experience. And these are I don't need to tell you about these particularly any more than that. I kind of love them, both for different reasons. But in my head, one answers the question of the other, and vice versa. Next, which just happens to be the book I read afterwards. And despite the name being part of the reason why I bought it, kind of as a joke, it actually turned out to be a pretty wook book, Stoner. So Stoner is, it's set initially before World War One, and does go through World War One and World War Two and like a bit beyond. But you follow the life of a character called William Stoner. He basically has just grown up on like a farm, very like agricultural based, but not particularly bright. Didn't have much of an education. He just sort of worked his land. Then on his 16th birthday, he sits with his dad and mum, and his dad's just like, "You're going to the University of Missouri. Cart leaves in half an hour. You're going to be staying with your aunt and uncle and doing work on their farm while you study agriculture. You'll be there for 4 years, and then you'll come back, and with the experience you've learned, you'll save the farm," sort of shit. They're trying to send their son off to, make his brain, better, but for the purpose that they understand the brain is useful in their world, in the world that, their lens. And he does, no questions asked. He's not really learned to think for himself yet. And he will find himself not really being that enthralled in agriculture, and he'll take to literature. But he won't find any value in literature. He won't know what the point is. And so he'll finish university. He won't have the skills that he went there for. He just has a love for literature that he doesn't know what to do with. He's lucky. This gets recognised, and he ends up working within the university, and then becomes captivated with a woman in a very different sort of life to what he's really had any exposure or even probably awareness of. They get together quite quickly, get married, and it follows the story of this character from that point of him, not really having a mind of his own, going into a world and having to, develop whilst behind and figure things out. I'm not doing it justice, but you follow this guy throughout his life, and it gives some really good insights. If this one's writing, this one's reading, this one is what happens when you've read a lot. This one gives you a full lifespan of a person to understand and relate to, and to experience his conclusions with what it is that has happened, and it's so relatable. I have a love for this book. The only thing it's missing is a good blunt. The guy, to my memory, doesn't encounter a flipping drop of weed. So I actually need to finish this particular one still. I started reading it just before I started reading Stoner. About halfway through. But the writing style is I'm not going to say it's curse, it's a flat out blessing, it's just good. The Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime, it's about a kid I don't think it explicitly says it, but he's, autistic, good at maths, really analytical, detail, logical sort of kid. And his teacher is basically incentivized him to read a book, and she'll help him like through that. And he likes the idea of he likes detective stories, so he's writing a detective story, and he basically finds a dead dog, and people around him are a bit weird about it, and so he starts looking into it and uncovering things to do with like his neighbour and his family. But really what you're here for isn't the mystery, but you're here to get inside the head of this writer and to see things from his perspective, and therefore to be able to further relate not only to yourself but to younger people. To just, this is really good for getting you inside a different type of mind to what you remember exists. I think this is a very important book, and I'm glad I've got it. I'm looking forward to finishing it off and maybe reading it a second time one day. Pretty Wook book. Just for fun, tell you about Mogworld. This was written by Yahtzee Crawshaw, zero punctuation. Yeah, he's wrote books, not just for one. This one, Come to the Horde, is about a little grass stains and dead guy who he's living in an MMO, and it was years since I last read this, but it's just a story about, this thing in an MMO just sort of, I think he might be like the only self-aware AI or like self-aware non-player character or something like that. Just getting about dealing with the MMO logic, and ends up having to go on his own quest. And I don't remember the details because it was maybe 9 years ago or so. But I do actually really highly recommend coming to the Horde and reading Mogworld. Pretty Wook book. Next. This is a big one. This is a textbook of a book in almost the literal sense of a word, and this is another one I've not finished. I made a lot of progress with it in one day, and I know my girlfriend read it when she was very young, and I actually bought it just so that there'd be a copy of it around us, because it left quite an impression. And it's got a very interesting, very strange style. It's not like other books, but when you start to think of it as the author has effectively made a textbook, but a story that weaves throughout a textbook in a very strange and sort of different way. For example, there's pages that run through just sort of am I getting, look at this sort of stuff. And you'll get to a point where there's just these weird things where pages will change formats, and half of a story will be told to you in these bits here. I don't know enough about textbook structures in terms of the language to use to describe them. Here's just an entire, look at that, just an entire page of just an annotation, because it's a story about a person telling a story from fragments of another person's attempt to tell us. It's about a house that changes shape and its dimensions, and someone else finds a tunnel that keeps going down and down and down, and every time they find a big space, there's a staircase that just keeps this is a flipping mental book. If I could pick one book that's a non-fiction book, this is that book. This fiction book, this is the best. I hold this up with high regard. I could spend a long time with this, studying, thinking about it, ruminating in it. Love it! Pretty Wook book! Plucking it out from right next to it. This is Daniel Dennett's Intuition pumps and other tools for thinking. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher, and what he does in this is bring philosophy, high level philosophy, like the big thinkers, and brings it down to earth in a practical way that is useful for everybody. This book will, if you go through it and give it the proper time, it will actually teach you how to think, and I'm not even taking the piss. Studying this book is the study of language, it's the study of maths, it's the study of logic, it's the study of the human brain, it's the study of thinking, it's our history. And I'm going to pair this with another one, which does a similar sort of thing, but in a very different way. That's potentially more traditional of sort of like what people might go into things to read. This is another philosopher. This is Theodore Zeldin, The Hidden Pleasures of Life. This will tackle various different topics, and it won't do so in a fixed point of view. It will jump around between different times in history to pull different stories and different ways to interpret the experience of something as basic as the function of a hotel. Let me just open this up. Context. What is the great adventure of our time? What is a wasted life? How can people lose their illusions about themselves? What alternatives are there to being a rebel? What can the poor tell the rich? What can the rich tell the poor? How many ways are there of committing suicide? How can an unbeliever understand a believer? How can a religion change? How can prejudice be overcome? How else can one think about the future apart from trying to predict it or worry about it? And many more. I love this. I actually left my copy somewhere. I lost it for all intents and purposes, and bought it again because I needed it. I needed to have it in my life. I needed to have it on my shelf here amongst my stuff. What else have I got to show you? Richard Dawkins, The Magic of Reality. It does a similar sort of thing to, I guess, The Hidden Pleasures of Life, but it explores, one second. Some pretty good coffee. So this book, it explores, similar to what he did with The God Delusion, where he, spent an entire book talking about how God is bad or exploring the notion of God. It was a long time ago since I actually last read that. I don't know what I think about it now. I might not actually agree with everything as wholeheartedly as he was able to convince me at the time when I first read it. Context, because that'll explain the book better than I'm gonna do. What is reality? What is magic? Who was the first person? Why are there so many different kinds of animals? What are things made of? Why do we have night and day, winter and summer? What is the sun? When and how did everything begin? Are we alone? What is an earthquake? Why do bad things happen? What is a miracle? And I know that it gets more specific than that, because this will talk about, ghosts, aliens, why voodoo works, because psychology, and this is a really good one for all of the questions that I had as a kid, all of the curiosities, to an extent the things that made the world feel alive and actually capture my interest. This has the answer to pretty much all of them. In a way, it's called The Magic of Reality because it wants you to be in awe of this stuff, but when you fully know all of the reasons why ghosts probably don't exist, you'll lose a little something, especially if you liked that sort of shit. Which I did. I was into it. I liked the idea of there being more to this plane of reality than what you can initially just sort of touch. I wanted there to be more than just the rules of science, of atoms and of physics, pushing and pulling. And there is more than that, but really putting your finger on it, the truth of what that is, it turns out is actually more magical than it just, there's just some other plane of existence and things can just cross over. Or, the spirit can linger and just sort of walk about, but maintaining a rough notion of the form that it used to have. And why do we believe that? We are think about what we actually freaking are, yo. Consider it. I consider that when you pass, in order for my hand to move like that, there's bone. The bone is like a fixed thing, but in order for that to move, there has to be these pulleys in me, and then there has to be the electrical signals that activate them and contract them so that this happens. And we're expected by some to believe that when we die, this stuff can just, as a form of energy, continue to retain that stuff. Even if we do continue to exist, why would it retain the shape, the form, anything to do with... We wouldn't have this physical, it would just float, we'd just be dust or something, probably. We'd be energy. What does energy look like? If anything exists after we're gone, it's energy. I don't know. But please in case I've not put this into proper context, in case I've not put myself into proper context, I'm just practicing talking here for the most part. And that's what this is. This is just me using books as a means to engage, to talk, to bring myself out of the trap of being, just far too internal. I've been doing the media side of things for a while, but something in which I rejected for the longest time was the social element, was actually the notion that I'm talking to somebody rather than creating a video essay where I'm trying to put a book into its full sort of context. I'm honestly just not smart enough to do that. Whenever I press record, I actually prefer the method of, I don't know what's going to happen. I like to set things up, and then I like to just go, charge as much as sort of possible to some extent, and then boom! So, with that in mind, I drew this. I also drew this quite some time ago. What are they? What are these things that I've drawn? They're nothing. Really? They're pen strokes. I know that might sound like, oh, he's being pedantic. Yes, they're pen strokes, but they take on a form. That's kind of what I'm getting at. When I draw what I think of as automatically, so without intent, so each brushstroke is an instance in and of itself, and I'm not thinking about the greater whole, as it would, after a while, a greater whole will form, and that will take me by surprise. And I clicked onto my creativity in terms of drawing this way quite early on, we're talking 11 or more years ago now, before I started doing any of the other creative stuff. And I always wanted to be able to create that way, but across other mediums. I don't want to have a final picture in my head and then to try and weave reality into taking that form. I much prefer, as I've just stated, to set things up, lights, blah 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 stuff, and just go. And then what you get at the end is what is. And that's, yeah. That's where we're at. Let's have one final book. I don't know what it is yet. I pulled some out, so in order to prepare for doing this, I did actually pull some just a little bit forwards, so that when I'm like, right, what book should I talk about next, I'd already like pre-planned to some extent which ones I was going to pull out. Is there anything over here I've maybe not thought of? That's a curveball. Let's tell you about this. So, I originally saw the Netflix show, and then afterwards seeked these out, and they are literally the contents of the Netflix show, but as a manga. And that is The Way of the House Husband. I found that show fucking hysterical. It's about like the biggest, scariest guy in Yakuza, calls himself something like the Immortal Dragon, or is known as the Immortal Dragon. One day he kills like all of like the biggest leaders and then just disappears, and all of the gangs are like terrified, and it's left like the underworld in disarray. Turns out he's just sacked off the gangster life and is just got married to some cute person and is just being a cute old house husband, but with all the intensity of a serious Yakuza guy, but all of that just channeled into house husbanding. It's hysterical. Go watch it. Way of the House Husband, yeah. Pretty wook book. Hear me out. I kind of see these two books as sort of two different sides of a similar coin, because both of them are ultimately guiding you towards a certain like practice for the benefit of yourself. They're both ultimately trying to guide you towards manifesting your destiny. The fluffy way about it is the artist way. The goal of this is to tell you to write like 2 pages every day of just your mind, and just to always do that, to habitualize it, to ritualize it, to honor it. And this one, yeah, I potentially know what some people might be thinking. And this one definitely is way more intense, because this is intended for like, you know, helping people. Like this is a therapy book for like a type of like mental illness. No, that's not the best way of putting it. I see them as similar. I see them as, you know, as I said, both ways of manifesting what you potentially most want to be, and they're good versions of it. If you work through them, probably in combination with like, you know, Miracles on Demand over there, and you can forge yourself into anything. You too can unlock the summoner within yourself and bring out whatever it is that you want, that you need. You have to set up the world for it to be able to exist in. Then you have to bring it out and let it exist in that world and maintain it and keep it going and keep it alive. This is 1Q84 by Hiroku Murakami. This is actually book 3. Book 1 and 2 were first, well, it was like as one book, but that was the first Murakami I was ever exposed to. It blew my mind. It's started me off on a reading journey quite a while ago, and I've got loads of Murakami books now. Killing Commandante, I've got Blind Willow, Sleep in Water. It's not the actual name, I made that up. There's more here somewhere, but you get the idea. He might be my favourite author. I'll have to talk about him more in the future, because this video is about to wrap up. I go until the I go until the camera cuts out, which is at 29:59, and that's the video, so we're near the end. Thank you very much for watching. I know this has been a little bit sort of sporadic, but that's for weight and